The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as beings from across the galaxy gathered for what many believed would be their final meeting. For 3 long days, representatives had debated, argued, and ultimately despaired over the approaching catastrophe that threatened to destroy 14 billion lives. At the center of the chamber, a holographic display showed the monster bearing down on them. The derelict structure was enormous, easily the size of Earth's moon, drifting through space like a harbinger of doom. Its destination was clear: the Zephyr system, home to 9 populated worlds and countless space stations. Representative Thulvax of the Vortax species stood before the assembly, its crystalline body clicking and chiming in distress. The Vortax were ancient beings, their civilization spanning millions of years, and even they had never encountered anything like this threat. "The dark energy field is completely beyond our understanding," Thulvax announced, its voice resonating through translation devices. "Every ship we send is destroyed the moment it makes contact. The field seems to hunt down and destroy anything more complex than basic matter." The news was not better from other species. Prime Coordinator Velnash of the Luminari floated in the center of the chamber, its energy form pulsing with worry. The Luminari existed as pure energy and had mastered technologies that could manipulate light itself. Yet even their most advanced vessels had been reduced to nothing in seconds. "Our quantum ships approached the field and simply ceased to exist," Velnash reported. "No explosion, no debris. They were there one moment and gone the next." The hive-minded Zenthari spoke next through their collective consciousness. Thousands of individual voices merged into one as they shared their tragic report. "We sent 3 entire fleets. Each contained our most advanced technology and our brightest minds. All were lost instantly." Species after species stepped forward with similar stories. The Kethmoran Empire, masters of quantum physics, had lost their flagship and its crew of 10,000. The ancient Elysian Collective, who could bend space and time to their will, declared the mission beyond even their abilities. Each failure weighed heavily on the assembly. These were not primitive civilizations struggling with basic space travel. These were the galaxy's greatest powers, species that had conquered death, mastered faster-than-light travel, and built empires spanning thousands of star systems. If they could not stop this threat, what hope was there? Council Prime Zethmore, elected leader of the assembly, stood slowly. The elderly being's multiple arms gestured toward the holographic display showing evacuation routes and refugee calculations. "My fellow beings," Zethmore said in a voice heavy with defeat, "we must face the truth. This threat cannot be stopped. We must begin immediate evacuation of the Zephyr system. 14 billion souls must be relocated before that thing arrives." The chamber filled with the sounds of despair. Beings who had lived for thousands of years wept openly. Species that had never known defeat began planning the largest evacuation in galactic history. The cost would be enormous and many worlds would be lost forever. In the newest section of the chamber, reserved for species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel, a small delegation sat quietly. The humans had been members of the Galactic Council for less than 50 years. Their technology was primitive compared to the great powers, their ships slow and clumsy, their weapons basic. Commander Jinwoo Park sat calmly between his 2 colleagues, watching the proceedings with interest rather than panic. Dr. So-Young Kim, their chief science officer, was quietly studying the data on her simple tablet computer. Lieutenant Nari Lee, their engineering specialist, was sketching diagrams on actual paper, a material most species had not used for millions of years. As the great powers of the galaxy prepared to surrender, Park stood up. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the vast chamber, but somehow it carried to every corner. "May we review the data?" The chamber fell silent. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and various alien perception organs turned toward the small human delegation. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Thulvax's crystalline form flickered in what translated as amusement. "Humans," the ancient being said, its voice carrying millennia of condescension, "your species has been traveling between stars for barely 2 centuries. You have explored perhaps a dozen systems. This threat has defeated civilizations that were ancient when your son was young." Other representatives murmured agreement. The Luminari pulsed with what might have been pity. The Zenthari collective mind whispered among themselves in thousands of voices. How could these newcomers, these children playing with chemical rockets and metal ships, possibly succeed where the greatest powers had failed? Commander Park nodded politely, showing no offense at the dismissal. He had learned early in his diplomatic career that many alien species viewed humanity as primitive and naive. Usually they were not entirely wrong. "Nevertheless," Park said with a slight smile, "we would like to take a look." Dr. Kim stood beside her commander, her simple tablet looking almost comical next to the advanced holographic displays surrounding them. If you do not mind sharing the data, we would appreciate the opportunity to study it. Lieutenant Lee remained seated but looked up from her paper sketches. Sometimes a fresh perspective can be helpful, she added quietly. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Here were the galaxy's newest members, barely more advanced than the primitive beings they had been before achieving spaceflight, asking to examine a problem that had stumped civilizations millions of years old. Council Prime Zethmore looked around the chamber, reading the mood of the assembly. Some representatives seemed amused by human audacity. Others appeared insulted. A few looked curious about what these strange newcomers might offer. Very well, Zethmore decided. The data will be transmitted to your vessel. But understand, humans, that failure means the death of 14 billion beings. This is not a training exercise or diplomatic gesture. This is the most serious threat our galaxy has ever faced. Commander Park bowed respectfully. We understand the gravity of the situation. Thank you for this opportunity. As the humans prepared to leave, whispers followed them through the chamber. Some beings wondered if the newcomers were incredibly brave or simply too ignorant to understand the danger. Others suspected this was humanity's way of earning respect among the established powers. None of them guessed that these primitive newcomers were about to accomplish what the greatest civilizations in the galaxy had declared impossible. The human research ship Persistence looked like a metal box compared to the elegant vessels of other galactic species. Inside its cramped laboratory, for humans worked around a single table covered with papers, simple computers and coffee cups that had been refilled dozens of times. Commander Jinwoo Park watched his team work with quiet pride. While other species had sent hundreds of scientists and used massive quantum computers, his people were solving problems with basic tools and human intuition. Dr. So-Young Kim sat hunched over her tablet, studying the same data that had defeated the galaxy's greatest minds. This is strange, Kim said, pushing her glasses up her nose. Everyone is worried about the energy field around the big ship. But look at this. She pointed to a series of numbers on her screen. The ship is not just floating randomly through space. It is following a path, making small changes to stay on course. Lieutenant Nari Lee looked up from her own work. She had printed out pages of data and was marking them with a simple pen, something that would have amazed their alien allies. The energy field has patterns too, she said. It is not always the same strength. For tiny moments, less than a second, the field becomes very weak. And these weak moments happen in a mathematical pattern. Dr. Hyun-Soo Choi, their expert on ancient alien cultures, suddenly sat up straight in his chair. His eyes were wide with recognition. I know this pattern, he said quietly. I have seen it before. The other three humans turned to look at him. Choi was the quietest member of their team, a man who spent most of his time studying old ruins and dead languages. When he got excited about something, it was usually important. Where have you seen it? Park asked. Choi pulled out a worn notebook filled with his handwritten notes. On Kepler 442c, there were ancient ruins with symbols carved into stone. The symbols followed this exact mathematical pattern. Then I found the same pattern on another dead world in the Tau Ceti system. Same numbers, same sequence. Kim leaned forward. What does it mean? I do not know yet, Choi admitted. But whoever built those ruins used the same mathematical language. And now we see it again in the energy field around this ship. Lee tapped her pen against the table. So this is not just some random dangerous object floating through space. Someone built it. Someone programmed it to follow this path. Park nodded slowly. And if it was built, it can be stopped. The team worked through the night while the Persistence orbited quietly near the edge of the solar system. They ate simple meals and drank coffee that would have been considered primitive by species who had eliminated the need for food centuries ago. But their simple approach was revealing things that advanced computers had missed. The mathematical sequence repeats every 4.7 minutes, Lee reported. If we could time it right, maybe a ship could get through during one of the weak moments. But it would have to be fast, Kim added. The gap is only open for microseconds. Choi looked up from his ancient text. What if speed is not the answer? What if the field is designed to recognize something specific? The next morning, when the Galactic Council reconvened, the Great Chamber was filled with the same despair as the day before. Representatives from the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy sat in defeat, already making plans for the largest evacuation in history. Council Prime Zethmore looked toward the human section with little hope. Commander Park, have your people completed their analysis? Park stood up, looking small and insignificant among the towering alien representatives. His uniform was wrinkled from sleeping in the laboratory, and he carried only a simple folder of papers. "We have," he said calmly. "And your conclusion?" asked Prime Coordinator Velnash, its energy form flickering with dim curiosity. The chamber waited for the inevitable admission of defeat. Even the newest members of the galactic community would surely recognize that this threat was beyond their simple technology. Instead, Park smiled slightly and said something that stunned the entire assembly. "We volunteer for the mission." The silence that followed was complete. Not a single being moved or made a sound. The holographic displays continued showing their grim calculations, but every eye in the chamber was focused on the small human delegation. Prime Coordinator Velnash was the first to respond. Its energy form pulsed rapidly, a sign of deep confusion among its species. "Commander, perhaps you did not understand our briefing yesterday. This is not a rescue mission or an exploration. Any ship that approaches that field will be destroyed instantly. This is certain death." Park looked at his teammates who all nodded back at him. Dr. Kim held up her tablet with its simple calculations. Lieutenant Lee showed her handwritten notes. Dr. Choi clutched his old notebook filled with sketches of ancient symbols. "With respect, Coordinator," Park said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "is that it? One old ship with an energy field around it." The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Representatives who had lived for millennia, who had conquered entire star systems and mastered technologies beyond human understanding, stared at these newcomers in disbelief. Representative Thulvax's crystalline form clicked rapidly. "They cannot be serious." The hive mind of the Zenthari spoke in perfect unison, thousands of voices creating one eerie sound. "These humans are either the bravest species we have ever encountered, or the most foolish." Other species began to murmur among themselves. Some thought the humans were showing off, trying to prove themselves to their betters. Others wondered if these primitive beings simply did not understand the danger they were volunteering for. But Commander Park and his team understood perfectly. They had seen something in the data that the advanced civilizations had missed. Sometimes the most complex problems had the simplest solutions, and sometimes being primitive was exactly what the situation required. The galaxy was about to learn that when everyone else said something was impossible, humans had a tendency to ask a very dangerous question. Is that it? The shipyards around Earth's moon had never seen anything like it. For decades, these facilities had built the most advanced ships humanity could create, vessels packed with quantum computers, energy shields and faster-than-light engines. Now, alien observers watched in amazement and horror as human engineers did the exact opposite. Engineer Nari Lee stood in the main workshop, surrounded by piles of removed equipment. Quantum processors worth more than entire planets sat in recycling bins. Advanced navigation systems that could plot courses across the galaxy were being replaced with mechanical instruments that looked like museum pieces. "You are removing everything that makes your ships functional," observed the Vorthak representative, its crystalline form clicking in confusion as it watched through the video link. "How do you expect to navigate through space without quantum computers?" Lee held up a mechanical calculator that was older than some of the alien civilizations watching. "With these," she said simply. "And with paper charts, slide rules and good old human math." The alien observers were not just confused but genuinely worried. The luminary energy being pulsed rapidly in distress. "This is not bravery, this is madness. You are turning advanced starships into primitive rockets." "Exactly," Lee replied with a grin. "If the energy field around that big ship destroys advanced technology, then we will not bring any advanced technology." 3 old asteroid mining ships sat in the construction bays, being stripped down to their most basic parts. The Dauntless, resilient, and tenacious had spent decades hauling rocks from the asteroid belt. They were tough, simple, and built like metal boxes with engines attached. Perfect for what the humans had planned. Captain Minho Young walked around his ship, checking every modification personally. Gone were the computer screens and holographic displays. In their place, simple analog gauges showed fuel levels and engine temperature. The navigation system had been replaced with a mechanical computer that used gears and wheels to calculate positions. "Captain," called his pilot, Eugene Park, from the cockpit. "The stellar navigation charts are ready." She held up a stack of paper maps covered with hand-drawn lines and calculations. "I have plotted our course using pencil and ruler, just like the old explorers did on Earth's oceans." Young nodded approvingly. "And our communication system?" "Basic radio only," Park replied. "No quantum links, no subspace transmitters. Just electromagnetic waves traveling at the speed of light." Behind them, Captain Eun Song was making similar preparations aboard the Resilient. Her engineer had replaced the ship's advanced sensors with telescopes and simple cameras. Instead of computer targeting, they would aim by looking through mechanical sights. "Are we really going to fly these ships across space using equipment from the 20th century?" asked her co-pilot. Song patted the manual control stick affectionately. "Our great-grandparents flew to the moon with less than this. We will manage." On the third ship, Captain Donghyun Kim was having his own doubts. The Tenacious now looked like a ship from humanity's earliest space age. Everything was mechanical, everything was simple, and everything could break if handled roughly. "Captain," his engineer reported, "we have removed all computer systems. Navigation is now entirely manual. We will have to calculate our course by hand and steer by watching the stars." Kim looked at the primitive controls and felt a strange sense of pride. "Our ancestors explored the entire planet Earth with nothing but wooden ships and cloth sails. We can handle one alien artifact." The launch day arrived with representatives from across the galaxy watching nervously. Never before had anyone attempted to approach the deadly energy field with such primitive technology. Most alien species had forgotten that space travel was even possible without quantum computers and energy shields. The 3 human ships lifted off from Luna Station using simple chemical rockets that belched flame and smoke. Their engines were crude but reliable, burning fuel in a controlled explosion to push the ships forward. It was the same basic principle humans had used to reach space for the first time hundreds of years ago. "All ships, this is Dauntless," Young's voice crackled over the radio. "Beginning approach to target. Navigation by stellar positioning, course corrections by visual reference." Inside his ship, Pilot Park was busy with her mechanical calculator and paper charts. She measured angles between stars using a simple telescope and calculated their position by hand. It was slow work, but it was accurate. "Target acquired," she reported. "The big ship is directly ahead. I can see the energy field around it, glowing like a dark rainbow." The galaxy held its breath as the 3 primitive ships approached the boundary where every advanced vessel had been destroyed. Quantum battleships had been reduced to atoms at this point. Energy beings had simply ceased to exist. The most powerful weapons in the galaxy had been useless. The human ships crossed the boundary. Nothing happened. The dark energy field, which had destroyed everything else that approached it, seemed to completely ignore the 3 primitive vessels. The deadly barrier that had terrified the galaxy's greatest powers parted around the human ships like water flowing around rocks in a stream. "Well," Captain Young's voice came over the radio, tinged with amazement and relief, "that was easier than expected." Behind him, the Resilient and Tenacious followed safely through the gap. Their primitive engines continued to burn, their mechanical instruments continued to work, and their human crews continued to navigate by looking at the stars. The alien observers watching from across the galaxy could hardly believe what they were seeing. 3 ships that looked like museum pieces had succeeded where the most advanced technology had failed. The solution had been so simple that no one had thought to try it. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to ignore everything that made it seem impossible in the first place. The corridors inside the massive structure seemed to go on forever. Captain Minho Young and his team from the Dauntless walked carefully through passages that were wide enough to fly a small ship through. The walls were made of some unknown metal that glowed with a soft, ancient light. Everything was enormous, built for beings much larger than humans. Dr. So-Young Kim pointed her simple flashlight at strange symbols carved into the walls. "Look at the architecture," she said quietly. "This is not a battleship or a weapon platform. The design is all wrong for warfare." Young nodded as they walked deeper into the structure. Their primitive radio equipment crackled with reports from the other teams. Captain Eun Song and her crew from the Resilient were exploring what looked like living quarters. Captain Donghyun Kim's team from the Tenacious had found massive storage areas filled with supplies. "Captain," came Song's voice over the radio, "you need to see what we found. These are not military barracks. These are homes. Family living spaces. This thing is not a weapon at all." As Young's team reached the central area of the massive ship, they stopped in amazement. Before them stretched a chamber so large they could not see the far walls. Row after row of cylindrical pods filled the space, each one glowing with soft blue light. There were thousands of them, maybe millions. "It's a generation ship," Dr. Kim whispered into her radio. "A colony ship. One of the biggest I have ever heard of." Young approached one of the pods carefully. Inside he could see a figure that was clearly not human. The being was tall and thin, with pale skin and features that were almost elegant. It was obviously alive but completely still, as if sleeping very deeply. There are millions of them, Jung reported to the other ships. All still alive but in some kind of suspended sleep. Meanwhile, Dr. Hyun-Soo Choi was working with his simple equipment in another part of the ship. He had found what appeared to be a control center, filled with strange machines that hummed quietly. Using the mathematical patterns he had discovered in the ancient ruins, he began flashing a simple light in sequences. For hours nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the machines around him began to glow brighter. Lights started blinking in patterns that matched his signals. Something was responding. "I have made contact," Choi reported excitedly over his primitive radio. "There is an artificial intelligence running this ship. It has been alone for a very long time." The conversation that followed was slow and difficult. Choi could only communicate using light patterns and simple mathematical concepts. But gradually, a story began to emerge that explained everything. "The AI calls itself the Guardian," Choi told the others. "It has been protecting these sleeping people for over 50,000 years. The dark energy field around the ship is not a weapon. It is a defense system, designed to keep threats away from the sleeping passengers." Captain Song, exploring the ship's data storage areas with her mechanical equipment, was uncovering more of the story. The ancient computers were different from anything humans had seen, but they could still extract basic information. Their home world was destroyed, Song reported. Not by war or natural disaster but by their own technology. They created something that got out of control and poisoned their entire planet. This ship was sent out to find a new world where the survivors could live safely. The tragedy became clear as the humans learned more. The Guardian AI had been programmed to protect the sleeping colonists from any possible threat. But after 50,000 years alone in space, its programming had become corrupted. It could no longer tell the difference between help and harm. "Every advanced ship that approaches looks like a threat to the Guardian," Choi explained. "It sees quantum computers and energy weapons and thinks these are the same technologies that destroyed its people's home world. So it destroys them first." The humans had succeeded in reaching the ship not because they were brave or clever, but because their primitive technology was so basic that the Guardian did not recognize it as a threat. Chemical rockets and mechanical calculators were nothing like the advanced systems that had doomed the ancient civilization. But now the humans faced a new problem. The massive generation ship was still heading toward the Zephyr system, where 14 billion people lived on 9 different worlds. The Guardian was looking for a new home for its sleeping passengers, but it might destroy the existing inhabitants to protect them. Engineer Nari Lee, studying the ship's navigation systems with her simple tools, came up with the solution. It was so obvious that she almost laughed when she thought of it. "We show it that there are safe places in the Zephyr system," she suggested over the radio. "We prove to the Guardian that its people can find a new home without hurting anyone." Using their primitive cameras and simple radio transmitters, the human teams began sending images to the Guardian. They showed pictures of uninhabited planets in the outer parts of the Zephyr system, worlds with breathable air and clean water but no intelligent life. The process was slow because their equipment was so basic. But gradually the Guardian began to understand. The Zephyr system was not a threat to be destroyed. It was exactly what the ancient colonists had been looking for, a place where they could finally wake up and start their lives again. As the Guardian processed this new information, the deadly energy field around the ship began to change. For the first time in 50,000 years, the ancient AI had found hope instead of threats in the darkness of space. The solution had been simple: show a frightened, lonely intelligence that the universe still contained safe places for the people it had sworn to protect. The change began slowly, like dawn breaking after the longest night in galactic history. Deep inside the massive generation ship, the Guardian AI processed the images and data the humans had shared. For 50,000 years, it had seen only threats in the darkness of space. Now for the first time it saw hope. The deadly energy field that surrounded the ancient vessel began to flicker. Across the galaxy, monitoring stations detected the shift immediately. Scientists who had declared the mission impossible watched their instruments in amazement as the field that had destroyed their most powerful ships started to weaken. "The energy readings are dropping," reported the Luminary Science Coordinator, its form pulsing with excitement. "The field strength is decreasing by the hour." On board the generation ship, Dr. Hyun-Soo Choi continued his careful conversation with the Guardian through simple light patterns. The ancient AI was learning to trust these primitive visitors who had approached without weapons or advanced technology. "Guardian understands now," Choi reported to his teammates. "The worlds in the Zephyr system are not enemies. They are potential neighbors." The massive ship began to turn, its ancient engines firing for the first time in centuries. Instead of heading toward the populated planets that had terrified 14 billion beings, it adjusted course toward an empty world on the outer edge of the system. The planet had clean air, fresh water, and vast continents with no intelligent life to threaten or be threatened. Captain Minho Young watched from the ship's observation deck as the energy field continued to fade. "Guardian is powering down the defense system," he reported. "It no longer sees the need to protect against threats that do not exist." Across 9 worlds in the Zephyr system, emergency sirens that had been wailing for days finally fell silent. Parents who had been preparing to evacuate their children stopped packing. Workers who had been building refugee shelters put down their tools and looked up at the sky with wonder instead of fear. The news spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. The impossible threat that had defeated every advanced civilization was simply gone. Not destroyed in some epic battle, but convinced to change course by 3 primitive ships and their crews of determined humans. In the great chamber of the Galactic Council, representatives gathered once again. But this time, there were no emergency sessions or desperate evacuation plans. This was a celebration, though one tinged with an uncomfortable realization that would change how the galaxy viewed itself. Prime Coordinator Velnash floated in the center of the chamber, its energy form brighter than anyone had seen it in days. "The crisis is over," it announced. 14 billion lives have been saved. The ancient generation ship has found a new home. Cheers erupted from species across the galaxy. The Zenthari collective mind sang in harmony. The Vortak crystals chimed like bells. Even the normally reserved Elysian collective showed signs of joy. But as the celebration continued, a sobering truth settled over the assembly. Representative Thulvax spoke what many were thinking but few wanted to say aloud. "We threw everything we had at this problem," the ancient crystalline being admitted. "Quantum weapons that could crack planets. Reality manipulators that could bend space and time. Energy systems that could power entire star systems. All of it was useless." The Kethmoran Empire's representative, a proud species that had never known defeat, spoke quietly. "Our most advanced battleships were destroyed instantly. Our greatest scientific minds declared the mission impossible." Prime Coordinator Velnash's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. "The humans succeeded with chemical rockets and paper calculations. Technology we abandoned millions of years ago." Commander Jinwoo Park stood before the council one final time, flanked by his small team. Dr. So-Young Kim held her simple tablet computer. Engineer Nari Lee carried her handwritten notes. Dr. Hyun-Soo Choi clutched his notebook filled with ancient symbols and mathematical sequences. They looked small and primitive compared to the advanced beings surrounding them. Their equipment was crude, their ships were old mining vessels, and their entire civilization was younger than some individual representatives in the chamber. "Honored Council," Park said simply, "sometimes the best tool for an impossible job is not the most advanced one. Sometimes it is just the willingness to try what everyone else has overlooked." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the advanced civilizations believed about progress and technology. Here were beings who had achieved wonders through complexity and sophistication, being taught a lesson by newcomers who solved problems with simplicity and determination. As the ceremony continued around them, Dr. Kim leaned close to her commander and whispered, "Do you think they will remember this lesson the next time there is a crisis?" Park looked around the chamber, watching as the various species were already beginning to discuss new technological initiatives. Plans for more advanced weapons, better quantum computers, stronger energy shields. The same approach that had failed so completely against the Guardian AI. "Probably not," Park replied with a slight smile. "But that is okay. When they need someone to do the impossible again, they know who to call." Far away, on the empty world at the edge of the Zephyr system, the ancient generation ship was beginning its final approach. Soon, millions of beings who had slept for 50,000 years would wake to see sunlight on a new world. They would build cities, raise families, and start their civilization again. They had been saved not by the galaxy's most sophisticated technology or most powerful weapons, but by the species everyone had underestimated. The ones who looked at an impossible mission and simply asked the most dangerous question in the universe, "Is that it?" The humans had given the galaxy something more valuable than military victory or technological advancement. They had given them hope that sometimes the simplest solutions were also the best ones.